Hi guys, I'm back. We're going to finish part 2 if we can. Hopefully the pieces aren't too long. Let's continue.
Pedestrians crowd the rainy streets of White Rock, Colorado. A couple exits a grocery store just as Jonah charges into them, knocking them down, spilling apples and oranges into shimmering puddles. Streetlights illuminate Jonah as he shouts a quick apology and runs into the street. A horn blares, headlights flash. Jonah slides over the hood of a yellow sedan into the path of a cyclist, knocking her down. She clambers to her feet, shouting at him as bullets whip through the air. Glancing over his shoulder, Jonah hard charges through a souvenir shop, breaking mugs and plates, and vaults through the back exit and into an alley, slipping on wet pavement. He springs to his feet and sprints away. Clearing a fence, he leaps, tumbles down a concrete embankment, and quickly scrambles to hide behind a collection of garbage bins. As he catches his breath, 2 assailants in black trench coats rush by him, holding gleaming pistols with silencers. Jonah squints into the darkness after them. Realizing someone wasn't too happy, he decoded their seemingly random sounds broadcast from unknown locations. Spies, he imagines, sending names and coordinates through encrypted signals and pulses for reasons he still hasn't puzzled out. But his superiors pulled him off fast when he had managed to decrypt names of corporations and prominent billionaires. They pulled him off a bit too fast. And so he thought he'd investigate on his own. Not the best idea he'd ever had, but something in him had to know, had to understand why he was ordered to stay away from these cryptic messages that contain the names of people who would sometimes disappear. To him, this seemed somehow related to human trafficking. But Dean didn't fit the pattern. He wasn't like the others who had disappeared. He was loud and outspoken and blaming the government for everything that had happened to his students. He needed to find the high school teacher before these henchmen did. Screams reverberate from his cell phone as Jonah sits in his small, grimy motel room. He watches the fake footage created by a few teens in the area. The screen fills with teens running from an abandoned station as fog rolls after them with deadly hooks like talons trying to snatch them. He has no idea what he's looking at. Looks like the paintings he had once seen in the Fresno Museum with his mother when he was just a kid. Art would broaden his horizons, she had said. Not this art. This art scared the shit out of him. He never wanted to go to another museum again after that. Dean Barker was their teacher. His name was encrypted in the signals because he knows something. His students definitely told him something. Jonah closes the video and opens Dean's digital profile, hoping for a clue, any clue to find him. Satellite facial recognition pictures in Dean's digital profile shows Jonah that the teacher often visits a community of homeless men and women carving out a meager existence under a busy overpass. He disembarks his car, walks down, and weaves through the small campfires, searching the cold, solemn faces illuminated by flicking orange light. After some time, he sees a man covered in blankets staring at him intently. As Jonah approaches the man, he jolts to his feet and charges away. Jonah sprints after him to the edge of the highway, where he watches Dean sprint past oncoming cars and disappear into the woods on the other side. With a heavy sigh, he returns to his car, trying to catch his breath, wondering what the hell this high school teacher knows that's got him so spooked. In the early morning, Jonah sits in his car surveying a nursing home, hoping Dean will try to reach out to his father. He unexpectedly sighs with the realization that he hasn't contacted his parents for at least 3 weeks, and they're probably worried sick about him. He's a fool and he knows it. You don't do that to the ones who loved, raised and protected you for the better part of your life. He feels like a spoiled, ungrateful, entitled brat for letting so much time pass without taking one moment, just one moment in his day, to connect with them. Jonah stares at the entrance of the nursing home, telling himself he'll find some time to call his parents in the evening. Dean's father has Alzheimer's and needs constant support. He doesn't even want to begin to imagine a life where his parents forget him, or don't remember how proud they are that he's using everything they instilled within him to protect and serve their country and the free world. He never admitted to them that he sometimes felt inadequate for spending most of his time behind a desk, despite his superiors telling him he was the right hand of very critical operations. The only problem is he has no idea what the left hand is doing with his work, and often Jonah feels like he's only being presented with a half-truth. It's why he's here. It's why he's running his own investigation with his savings. His perfectly reasonable questions about the corporations he deciphered from the signals touched a nerve, a major nerve. It was a reaction even his chief officer hadn't seen before, and he was officially ordered off the assignment. And so, being a good right hand, he officially moved on to a new assignment. Unofficially, though, he had questions he needed answered. As the sun slips below the horizon, Jonah spots a man leaving the nursing home through the side exit. Jonah disembarks and follows the man to the back of the home, where he loses him. Again. He curses under his breath and feels like he has to brush up on his field work. He needs to spend a little more time running investigations than sitting behind a desk, crunching numbers, searching for patterns, and talking baseball. With a sigh, he strides back to his car, tries to open the door, then realizes it's locked. He activates the remote in his pocket, opens the door, hops in, and starts the car. For a moment, he leans against the steering wheel as he stares at the entrance of the nursing home, frustrated with himself. He prepares to shift gears into reverse when the passenger door suddenly thrusts open and he finds himself staring at the barrel of a gun. Frustration turns to embarrassment as a hooded man jumps into the passenger seat and closes the door. Jonah raises his hands. Dean stares at him for a long moment, then lowers the gun. "Why are you following me? I said I'd come to you when it was safe." Jonah lowers his hands. He has no idea what Dean's talking about, but he clearly thinks he's someone he's not. He shrugs. "You need to be more careful. If I spotted you this easily, they'll spot you too. These people after me are highly trained, ex-military. They're pros. You don't see them coming before they put a bullet in your head." Jonah saw them coming when he was searching Dean's apartment. "How do you know I'm not one of them?" Dean swallows hard. "I'd be dead by now. You still want to talk to me? It's not too late to back away from the rabbit hole." "I do." "Drive. I'll tell you where to go." Dean refers to Jonah as Max, thinking he works with an independent organization investigating a series of missing persons. He directs him to a dirt road, which he follows to an old, decrepit wooden bridge. Jonah brakes to a stop by the woods and turns to Dean, who stares blankly at the bridge in the moonlight. Dean sighs. "My father and I used to fish in the river under that bridge. We had some good times." "What do you know about me, Max?" Jonah turns his gaze from him. "You were a high school teacher. You quit last year after the junkyard tragedy." "That was no tragedy. I knew those kids. They didn't bad trip and kill each other. They did a lot of stupid things, but they didn't do that." Jonah nods attentively. "At first, I thought spooks set them up, but then I realized it was much bigger than that. Aren't you going to take notes? Jonah taps his temple with a finger. I'll remember. Right. Well, Johnny and the others picked up signals from the old abandoned station in the mountains. Weird frequencies and vibrations. And they went up to see what was going on. And when they reached the station, they filmed a bunch of maniacs in robes conducting some ancient ritual while impaling some drugged man who had no idea what was going on. Jonah raises his eyebrows skeptically. That was fake footage, a prank to go viral. Dean shakes his head solemnly. I wish it were. They'd still be alive if it were. Mockingbirds embedded in the media told 10 lies to hide one truth. Then they discredited and eliminated the source. Dean was referring to an old initiative which had been shut down years before Jonah was born. Jonah sighed skeptically and would have normally dismissed this man as a conspiracy junkie, except for the fact that his name was important enough to encrypt in a series of signals. Before they were eliminated, they went up to the station again and got more footage before those bastards destroyed the bridge to get up there. I released some of that footage, and they responded. 10 lies to hide one truth. And somehow I must have left a digital trail. Dean shakes his head and stares blankly out of the windshield. The rabbit hole goes deep on this one. Real deep. Our institutions have been compromised by a few idiots trying to bring a very dark thing into our world. Jonah nods thoughtfully, just as a bullet punches into the rear of the car. Without hesitation, Dean vaults out into the high grass and charges through the woods. Jonah jumps out after him. Jonah moves stealthily through the shadows with his gun at the ready. He counted 2 assailants pursuing them, and he figures they're the same 2 who confronted him at Dean's apartment. Seems like a lot of heat for a conspiracy junkie peddling fake footage of ancient cults and deadly rituals. Quickly, he ducks in the underbrush and listens to steady footfalls growing louder and louder. He waits patiently for his pursuers. One runs past him. He lunges and knocks him unconscious with the butt of his revolver. He then slinks in the shadows and waits for the other. An instant later, he sees him rushing toward him. Just as he passes, he thrusts out his arm and clotheslines him. Then he quickly follows through with a pounding fist in the head. Straightening up, he calls out for Dean, and activating the light on his phone, proceeds to search for him. Jonah pulls up to the junkyard, hoping Dean has the same instinct. He disembarks, climbs over a chain-link fence, and surveys the area. Doesn't make sense. Something doesn't add up. His instinct tells him there are other possibilities. He takes a moment to clear his mind. Then he visualizes the teens arguing about what they should do next and where they should hide the evidence they've collected on this ancient cult. Johnny grabs an envelope and disappears amongst the piled cars. Jonah peers at the cars and wonders if there's something hidden in the yard, something the police may have overlooked. He figures he's got some time to kill before Dean shows up, if someone didn't get to him already. 10 lies to hide one truth. It's certainly possible. And it certainly sounds like something the agency would have done in its formative years, when mandates were hazy and departments were run by psychopaths like Stomper and Carter. All those secret departments and experiments that had destroyed so many lives had been officially shut down. But unofficially, he could not say for certain. Unofficially, the programs could have moved to other branches of the government, or they could have been rebranded within the manifold compartments of the agency. He couldn't know, not for certain. With a sigh, Jonah gives up his futile search for something that would corroborate the teacher's story. He jumps on the hood of a gutted truck, lying on his back, staring at the stars with a terrible feeling rising from the pit of his stomach. He's never going to see the teacher again. nor will anyone else. The teacher's gone. He'd never know the truth unless he bought some equipment and climbed up to the station to see for himself. Part of him wants to go home and just forget this whole ordeal. Another part of him wants to know, needs to know, needs to understand why he was pulled off the assignment so abruptly. The left hand didn't realize what the right hand was doing and panicked. That panic had caused a strange feeling inside of him. That very same feeling was there again, as when buried rumors of the agency creating and funding rebels to destabilize regions and sell weapons to governments began to resurface. The mere thought makes him want to quit and join his father on the farm. But he's never quit a thing in his life, and he can't help but see how perfectly positioned he is to weed the garden from within. Perhaps even kill a few snakes while he's at it. Seems to him quitting would only allow the weeds to grow and the snakes to reign. He couldn't allow that, and he certainly couldn't turn his back on his country, even if it meant living a double life. It's what he was doing anyway. The more he thought about it, the more he realized he was in for the climb of his life. Perhaps even the fight of his life.
Okay, I'm a little confused about that one, but I'll figure it out eventually. Let's continue.
Journal of a Moving Picture. The Trapper. Listen to a few memories of a deranged miner named Evan on the phonograph. In a nearby pile of discarded stories, I even found comic books inspired by the very same memories. It seems to me that these comics were created by artists and authors in other worlds who somehow dreamed of this maniac and his crimes. True in one world, fiction in another, and I suppose vice versa. Makes me wonder if someone in another world is dreaming and writing about us. 12 to midnight. The Crows. The farmhouse sat at the end of a long, serpentine dirt road in the middle of nowhere. The derelict house at the end of the road had a roof that sagged and a warped, wide-covered deck with bird feeders that hadn't been filled in years. The vast cornfields surrounding the farmhouse were wild and rumpled. A chime, dangling from a nearby gnarled tree, rang softly in the warm, humid wind as Max Holt, sitting on a hill at a distance, used binoculars to examine the barns, the rusting tractors, and an old, collapsing outhouse. Just beyond the farm, he noticed a cemetery with gravestones etched black against the dusk. He sighed lowered the binoculars, and wiped beads of sweat off his brow. "So why exactly am I in Texas?" he asked, adjusting a small device in his ear. "What's so special about this abandoned farm?" "It's not abandoned. We decoded a name 2 days ago and tracked him here." Hattie's voice emerged through the tiny black communication device in his ear. "What do we know about the mark?" Tom Smith, born Nevada, worked as a creative manager in the 60s and 70s in South America for several multinational corporations. No citations, no tickets, no fines. Always paid his taxes on time. Perfect record. Sounds like a cover. Good observation. His real name is Louis Rand, born in Oakland. Film degree from UCLA. Recruited by the government for a special department. Louis ended up in charge of manufacturing rebellion, meaning he produced fictional radio broadcasts in several countries reporting on the victories of rebels that never existed. Why go through all that trouble? People don't act if they've lost hope. What year are we talking about? 1950s. Louis created fictional rebel groups to revolt against a government that was trying to do some good for its people. Each broadcast reported a growing rebellion marching on the Capitol to depose of the president. Usual fare: lies, terror, propaganda, fabrications designed to make the rebels seem unbeatable so no one would dare oppose them. The agency created a boogeyman that never existed, and they used that boogeyman to overthrow an elected president trying to do some good for his country. Right, Max said. And heard they're working on a sequel to the original War of the Worlds. Looking forward to that myself. Heard it's an epic Five Eyes co-production with no expenses spared. He chuckled as he scanned the vast empty fields behind the farm. Should I be looking out for mutilated cows or scorched geometric shapes in cornfields? Not funny, Max. These operations corrupted, destabilized, and destroyed entire countries. And Louis has information the Veil wants. You need to get to him before they do. Suddenly, Max heard a rumbling in the distance. His binoculars swiveled to a black SUV thundering down the dirt road, throwing great clouds of dust in the air. Shit, we might be too late. I've got an SUV approaching fast. He hooked his binoculars to his belt and withdrew his pistol. I'm heading in. Watch yourself. Always. Max rushed down the hill as the SUV came to a stop and 3 shadowy figures vaulted out. 2 agents kicked the front door and charged into the house, while the others stood guard outside. As Max approached the entrance, he lowered to a stealthy crab walk. From inside, he suddenly heard someone cry out in pain. They had Louis and were preparing to torture him. He had to move fast. With a great sense of urgency, Max inched closer to the guard, concealing himself in the shadows. Then, all at once, he sprung up behind him, took him in a chokehold, and squeezed until his torso shook and his legs sagged. Carefully, Max lowered the unconscious agent to the ground as Louis released another scream. They had begun to interrogate him. He didn't have much time. Max followed the edge of the house to an open window and climbed inside the cluttered home, and nearly slipped on a counter covered in grime and dead flies. Stacks of dirty dishes covered the kitchen table. Piles of magazines and books rose from the floor to the ceiling. On the walls were black and white surveillance photos of artists painting murals and protesting various dictators that had been selected and sponsored by the agency. Max picked his way into the hallway, moving slowly toward the sound of hard knuckles hitting swollen flesh, accompanied by the occasional groan. He froze suddenly when everything stopped and one of the agents spoke. "Where are the letters?" Where are the crows? Who else knows about them? Lewis didn't answer. The punches and groans continued, and so did Max. He inched slowly toward the living room, picking his way around the stacks of boxes and crates, stopping with each step to listen. Where are the letters? Lewis coughed and struggled with every word. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just an old man who hoards a lot of useless junk from around the world. Max reached the living room and peeked through the open doorway. One agent prepared a small bottle of orange serum and held it up to Lewis. I'll ask my questions again. Disappoint me, you get a drop of grime. Disappoint me again, and we move to a spoonful. Another time, and it's the bottle. If we're mistaken, and you're just an old man who likes to hoard junk from around the world, then you have no idea what grime will do to you. The agent tilted the bottle and let a drop form on the rim and asked, where are the letters? Where are the crows? Who else knows about them? Lewis shook his head. You're dealing with forces you couldn't possibly understand. The agent smiled and let a drop of grime fall into Lewis's busted mouth. Lewis struggled to keep his mouth closed, but the drop dissolved into his cuts and swollen lips. I'm told a drop of grime unlocks a doorway to hell, the agent said. I can't imagine what a bottle would do. Let's try again, and let's not presume to know what I would and wouldn't understand. Lewis scoffed. You remind me of myself when I was first at the agency. Do you even know who you're working for? Who you're really working for? Not the government, not even the corporations. That's what I thought at first, when I realized we weren't working for the government. I thought we were working for the corporations, but they're just tools, like the agency, for a very dark end. Where are the letters? The agent filled a spoon with serum and thrust it into his mouth, breaking his 4 front teeth. Lewis gagged and coughed and spat blood and saliva. After a long moment, he said, You know, the serum you hold is made from a very peculiar flower that comes from another place. And I don't mean another country. Where are the crows? Your true masters are into some crazy shit. They are. They don't just sacrifice people to their ancient god. Oh, that'd be too easy. They go a step beyond. They sacrifice villages, towns, and countries, turning them into places of fear. It's all about the fear, hate, anger. Lewis nodded. What we did in the 50s and 70s was just the beginning. They want to sacrifice the world. They do. They think by turning this world into a living hell, they'll bring forth transcendence. The agent sighed. You are a stubborn old mule, aren't you? He grabbed his hair, tilted his head back, and smashed the bottle into his mouth, just as Max sprung from the shadows in one fluid motion, firing 2 rounds into each surprised face. Then he rushed to Lewis and pulled the bottle out of his gaping mouth. Lewis smiled at Max. I ain't getting out of this one. I can already hear the voices. The horror. Lewis, stay with me. Lewis stared at Max for a long moment. Then he said, "You're the ones they're after. The wrench in their finely oiled killing machine." Max nodded as the comms in his ears sounded. Ask him about what they wanted. He inched closer to Lewis. What do you have that scares them so much? Lewis smiled. Words. Words? Poetry, art, letters. Lewis began to sob, and Max was sure the serum was beginning to act on his faculties. Then he continued. I thought I was a patriot, preventing threats to our way of life. Imagine my surprise when I found out the agency is just a tool for a bunch of rich assholes in dark robes. I hurt so many people. They're coming for me. What did they want? Lewis struggled against the poison coursing through his veins. We targeted her because she was connected. She could see things in the other world. She could see their faces. And she could paint them in a way no remote viewer ever could. When we tried to own her, her voice, her art, so she wouldn't expose us, she still painted whatever she wanted. Lewis fell silent, and his face tightened. Her mother was the same, and we intercepted her letters to her daughter. We couldn't let her know her mother was still alive. Both mother and daughter had something between them we couldn't possibly understand. A variable we had somehow overlooked. Lewis groaned and trembled and struggled to calm himself before he continued. We paid her father to keep a close eye on her and report anything unusual in her art. She could see crows from the other world. She told her father they were following her, protecting her, and he thought she was crazy. Lewis began to breathe heavily. It was all there, in her collection. The crows. A blueprint of how they planned to sacrifice the entire world to their ancient god. I've seen the paintings, and I still don't get it. I hate what we did to that poor girl and her brother. At least the mother got away. Lewis trailed away. He collected his thoughts and took in a deep breath. The girl nearly got away, too. She ran, and she started a collective of artists, a rebellion we didn't control. And they painted and wrote poetry against the corruption, against the darkness. Lewis shook his head, almost in disbelief. They published a book of poetry, along with an underground magazine. We had to find every single one of those books and periodicals and burn them. Lewis began to stammer. Her mistake was going to her father. For all the things she had seen, she did not see him. Lewis lost himself for a moment. Tears formed in his eyes and slowly slipped down his face as he continued. She was just an experiment, and she ended up turning against us. She was the key, the leader, the inspiration for them, and for me. His eyes widened, as though he saw something horrible behind Max. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he continued with difficulty. What we did to them, I will never forgive myself for. Do you have the letters? They're coming for me. I can hear them. Do you have the paintings? Lewis started, then nodded as he struggled for every breath. Max realized he didn't have much time. Are they in the house? He asked, leaning closer to Lewis. But Lewis didn't answer. He tried to speak with difficulty, whispering, 15, 13. He repeated the numbers again, then suddenly shrieked and thrashed in the chair. Max tried to rip the tape off his arms as he jerked about, making the chair thump against the creaking floors. When Max finally freed him, Lewis jackknifed to his feet, charged past him, and dove straight through the window. Bleeding from multiple lacerations, he crawled towards the cemetery before his mouth froze in a hideous scream of terror. Outside, in the growing darkness, Max knelt beside Lewis, checking for a pulse, but didn't find any. Lewis's eyes were wide, and his hand extended out towards the cemetery. Nothing you could have done for him. Hattie's voice sounded in his ears. Max stared at the dead man's hands, then the cemetery, where he saw gravestones in the moonlight. 15, 13. It could be a safety deposit box, Hattie observed. Max nodded. Yeah, it could be. He narrowed his eyes on the cemetery. The trail of blood Lewis left in the ground was like an arrow pointing to a gravestone. Hold on. I got a hunch. Max stood and proceeded toward the cemetery. You need to be careful. There could be more agents on their way. Government agents I can handle. It's the other shit I'm worried about. Max found a burial plot marked 1513 in the small cemetery, and using a shovel he had found in a barn, he dug deep into the ground until he hit a coffin. He jumped down into the hole and brushed the dirt off the lid with his blistered hands. Then he heaved the rotten lid open to find a thick lining of black plastic. As he ripped the plastic apart, the scent of wet earth, paint, and burnt wood hit him like a slap in the face. But within moments, he found himself staring at sketches, books, envelopes, statuettes, and paintings from different times and origins. Jackpot, he said, and activated his cell phone camera to send a live stream to Hattie, who was sitting safely in the back of a cramped bookstore in New York City. Mora, Hattie said, as she observed the paintings. We've sensed she was marked like the others, but could never prove it. She was clearly connected. Her voice trailed away, pensively, as he held the cell phone above a painting of a medieval lord surrounded by stacks of bodies in a crumbling castle. Looks like another artist, also seen into the other realm. Max scanned the paintings, then moved on to a copy of a book titled Poets Against the Darkness. From within the book, he pulled out an envelope with WSFM written on it. What does WSFM stand for? Weird Science and Freaking Magic Department. Max chuckled. What? True story. You're starting to lag. Max looked up, and to his horror, he noticed a thick, unnatural fog creeping over the open grave. Shit, he said with dawning realization. I think I'm in a bleed. I think that's why Lewis hid the artifacts here. But Hattie didn't respond. A high-pitched whine sounded in Max's ear as he instantly pulled off the earpiece. As he thrust his comms into his pocket, he saw crows circling above, and he felt his entire body suddenly prickle with needles. His body was reacting to another vibration as he shifted in and out of another dimension. As he tried to gather himself, he heard a twig snap above. He looked up to see a tall woman made of darkness standing by the grave. Max quickly hid inside the coffin, pulling the wooden lid over. He stared through a crack in the wood at the dark apparition looming above him. It stared down at the coffin with cold, black eyes and black blood-like ink dripping down from its fingers. A crow flew down into the grave, landing on the coffin, pecking nervously at the lid, giving away his position. Max closed his eyes and waited to be dragged away to this other world. But the crow disappeared, and the apparition drifted away from the grave. Max quietly slipped out of the coffin and climbed out of the grave, ascending into a world of fog. He could hear the crows circling above, but couldn't see them. As he ran, he heard the sound of his heart thumping against his chest, and then he heard footsteps behind him, growing faster, louder. Max glanced over his shoulder, but saw only a mass of fog. He didn't wait for whatever lurked in the darkness to snatch him. He charged through the cemetery, jumped over the fence, and stumbled miserably to the ground. Then he closed his eyes and lost consciousness as a high-pitched whine filled his ear. When at last he opened his eyes, it was morning, and beams of golden sunlight poured through the cracks of a door, illuminating the darkness and warming his face. He had no recollection of what had transpired, only vague flashbacks of dragging himself over the ground while unnatural and incomprehensible things moved around him. He remembered the crows, the woman with the black eyes, and the shrieks and screams that rent the night. He remembered seeing the outhouse and crawling through a layer of fog. He remembered opening the creaking red door and hiding inside. Everything else was a blur. Covered in dirt and filth, he stepped out into the harsh white sunlight. He grabbed his phone and called Hattie. A moment later, her face appeared on the small screen. "Thought we lost you there." "I feel like I've been run over by a truck, but I'm still here." Max turned round and round, staring at the old farm. "I don't remember much." "You were out the whole night." "Yeah, well, it felt like an eternity."
Okay, you guys, it looks like I'm going to have to do a part 3 because I'm almost out of time again. So I will be right back, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Until then, this is Kirkland signing out. Stay safe out there in the fog, everybody. Bye for now.